The sound of a gavel striking mahogany usually signals the end of a conflict. But for Julian Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Logistics, that sound was the death knell of his entire life. He walked into the Manhattan Supreme Court wearing a $5,000 suit, holding the hand of his vicious mistress Sienna, believing his pregnant wife Jack was nothing more than a nuisance to be paid off. He watched with a smirk as Sienna physically assaulted Jack in the hallway, thinking they were untouchable. But Julian made one fatal error. He never bothered to ask about his wife's estranged family. He didn't know that the Honorable Justice Harrison Blackwell, the man staring down from the bench with eyes like cold steel, wasn't just the judge. He was the father of the pregnant woman they had just kicked to the ground, and court was now in session. The rain battered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue, distorting the glittering New York City skyline into a smear of grey and gold. Inside, the air was temperature-controlled, scented with imported sandalwood, and thick with tension. Jack Thorne stood near the kitchen island, her hand resting protectively over her 7-month baby bump. She looked tired. The glow that people always promised pregnant women would have was absent, replaced by the pale, hollow look of a woman who hadn't slept through the night in weeks. She was wearing a simple oversized sweater, the wool pilling at the sleeves, a stark contrast to the sleek, hyper-modern aesthetics of the apartment she shared with her husband, Julian. Julian Thorne was sitting on the Italian leather sofa, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up when he spoke. "The lawyer sent the draft over an hour ago, Jack. Sign it and we can stop this charade." Jack gripped the marble countertop. "It's a surrender, Julian. Not a settlement. You're leaving me with nothing. No housing, no support for the baby." "My baby," Julian corrected, finally looking up. His eyes were cold, the same ice blue that had once charmed her 3 years ago when she was a struggling art student, and he was the heir apparent to a shipping empire. "And don't be dramatic. I'm offering you $50,000. That's more than you made in a decade selling those depressing paintings." $50,000 wouldn't cover the medical bills, let alone rent in this city. Jack whispered, her voice trembling. "Julian, please. I know things have been bad, but for the sake of the family we're building." A sharp, high-pitched laugh cut through the room. Jack flinched. She hadn't heard Sienna enter. Sienna Vane walked down the floating staircase like she owned the place, because for all intents and purposes, she did. She was everything Jack wasn't: sharp, angular, dressed in a crimson Versace dress that clung to her body like a second skin. She was Julian's consultant, a title that fooled absolutely no one in their social circle. "Oh, honey," Sienna cooed, walking over to the sofa and draping herself over Julian's shoulder. She ran a manicured hand through his hair. "There is no family. There's Julian, and then there's the baggage he's trying to offload. You're the baggage." Julian didn't push her away. In fact, he leaned into her touch. It was a knife to Jack's heart, twisted slowly. "Sienna is right," Julian said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Look at you, Jack. You're pathetic. You spend all day moping around this apartment, getting fat, contributing nothing. I need a partner who matches my ambition. Not a charity case." "I'm pregnant," Jack said, her voice rising, a spark of anger finally igniting in her chest. "I am carrying your son. I'm not getting fat. I am creating a life you wanted." "I changed my mind," Julian said simply. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "I want a divorce, and I want full custody once the kid is born. You're clearly unstable. No judge will give a child to an unemployed artist with a history of—" What was it? Anxiety. Jack felt the blood drain from her face. "You wouldn't?" I would, and I will. Julian walked over to the counter, sliding a thick manila envelope toward her. Unless you sign this, you give up custody, you take the 50 grand, and you disappear. Go back to whatever trailer park you crawled out of. I didn't crawl out of a trailer park, Jack said softly. You know I didn't. Does it matter? Sienna interjected, examining her fingernails. You're a nobody, Jack. Julian is a Thorne. In New York, that name is royalty. You really think you can fight him? He has the best lawyers at Sterling and Cromwell on retainer. You have. What a library card. Jack looked at her husband. Julian, is this really you? Are you really going to throw us out on the street? Julian checked his Patek Philippe watch. You have 1 hour to pack your personal effects. Sienna wants the master bedroom cleared out by tonight. We're redecorating. 1 hour, Jack gasped. It's pouring rain. It's night time. Where am I supposed to go? Not my problem, Julian said, turning his back on her to pour a glass of scotch. If you're not gone in 60 minutes, I'll have security escort you out, and they won't be gentle. Sienna smirked, walking up to Jack until she was uncomfortably close. She smelled of expensive perfume and gin. You heard him, she whispered, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. Get out, and take that parasite in your stomach with you. If you try to fight us in court, I promise you, I will make it my personal mission to destroy whatever is left of your miserable life. Jack looked at them, the man she had loved, and the woman who had stolen him. She realized then that begging was useless. There was no humanity left in this penthouse. She turned without a word and went to the guest room where she had been sleeping for the past month. She packed a single suitcase. She took her sketchbook, her vitamins, and the few clothes that still fit her. As she walked to the elevator, struggling with the weight of the bag, neither Julian nor Sienna looked up. They were toasting with crystal glasses, laughing at something on the television. Jack stepped into the elevator, the doors closing on her old life. As the numbers ticked down to the lobby, she didn't cry. The shock was too deep. But beneath the shock, something else was forming. A cold, hard resolve. They thought she was a nobody. They thought she had no connections. Julian had never asked about her father, because Jack had never spoken of him. They had been estranged for 5 years, ever since she dropped out of law school to pursue art, a decision her rigid, traditional father couldn't forgive. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. Her fingers hovered over a contact she hadn't called in half a decade. The name on the screen read, The Judge. She hesitated. The shame was overwhelming. To go back to him now pregnant and abandoned exactly as he predicted she would be if she chose that bohemian lifestyle. She put the phone away. No, she thought. I'll do this myself. She walked out into the cold New York rain, hailed a cab, and gave the driver the address of a women's shelter in the Bronx. She didn't know that Julian had already cancelled her credit cards. She didn't know that the war was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since the night in the penthouse. Jack was staying in a small, damp studio apartment in Queens, paid for by the last of her savings. The bed was lumpy, the heating rattled, and the neighbors argued loudly until 3 a.m. It was a far cry from Park Avenue, but it was safe. Or so she thought. The legal papers had arrived via a process server who banged on her door at 6 a.m. Julian wasn't just suing for divorce. He was suing for defamation, claiming she had leaked false stories to the press she hadn't, and he was filing an emergency motion for sole custody of the unborn child, citing prenatal negligence. It was a fabrication, all of it. But reading the affidavit signed by Sienna Vane, accusing Jack of drinking heavily during pregnancy, made Jack's blood run cold. They were going to frame her. She needed a lawyer. Jack sat in the waiting room of Miller & Associates, a law firm located above a laundromat in Brooklyn. The carpet smelled of stale coffee and dust. Mrs. Thorne, Jack looked up. A harried-looking man with a stain on his tie stood in the doorway. "I'm David Miller. Come on in." David Miller was not Sterling and Cromwell. He was a general practitioner who mostly handled DUIs and slip-and-fall cases. But he was the only one who agreed to meet with her without a $5,000 retainer. "I read the file," David said, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I'm going to be honest with you, Jack. It's bad." "I didn't do any of those things," Jack said, her hands resting on her stomach. "I don't drink. I take every vitamin. I go to every scan." "Sienna is lying." "It doesn't matter what the truth is," David said, sighing. "It matters what they can prove, or what they can pay people to say. Julian Thorne is worth $300 million. He's hired Marcus Stone as his lead counsel." Jack felt a shiver. Marcus Stone was known as the Butcher in New York legal circles. He didn't just win cases, he annihilated the opposition. "So what do I do?" Jack asked. "Do I just give up my baby?" "No," David said, straightening up. "We fight. But you need to be prepared. They are going to play dirty. They have filed a motion to have the case heard this Friday at the Manhattan Civil Court. They're trying to rush it through before you can build a defense." "This Friday?" Jack gasped. "That's in 2 days." "Exactly. It's a strategy. Shock and awe." David looked at her sympathetically. "Jack, is there anyone in your family who can help financial support, character witnesses?" Jack looked down at her hands. She thought of her father again. The great Harrison Blackwell. He was a man of the law, a man of absolute truth. If he knew what Julian was doing, lying in sworn affidavits, he would be furious. But he was also a man of pride. If she called him now, begging for help, she would be admitting he was right about everything. "No," she lied. "There's no one. Just me." David nodded slowly. "All right. Then we go in with what we have. I'll draft a response to the defamation claims. But regarding the custody, it's going to be your word against theirs." The next 2 days were a blur of anxiety. Jack barely ate. She spent hours organizing her medical records, printing out text messages, where Julian had been abusive, trying to build a fortress out of paper to protect her child. Friday morning arrived with a grey, ominous sky. Jack put on her best dress, a navy blue maternity dress she had bought at a thrift store. It was modest and clean, but next to the couture she used to wear, it looked cheap. She took the subway into Manhattan, the rattle of the train tracks matching the pounding of her heart. She met David Miller on the steps of the courthouse. He looked nervous. "Okay, look," David said, checking his watch. "The judge assigned to the case is Judge Pendergast. He's old school. He tends to favor the money. He likes stability. Julian's team is going to paint you as unstable and homeless. We need to focus on your role as the primary caregiver." Jack nodded, taking a deep breath. "I can do this." They walked through the security scanners and headed toward the elevators. The hallway to courtroom 4B was crowded with lawyers, clerks, and nervous defendants. And then she saw them. Julian was standing near the water fountain, laughing. He looked like a Greek god in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than David Miller made in a year. Beside him was Sienna. Sienna was wearing white, a pristine white pantsuit that screamed innocence and power all at once. She spotted Jack instantly. The smile dropped from Sienna's face, replaced by a sneer. She tapped Julian on the shoulder and whispered something. Julian turned his eyes, locking onto Jack. There was no love, no regret, just annoyance. They began to walk toward Jack and David. Well, Sienna said, her voice echoing in the marble hallway. "Look who decided to show up. I thought you'd be living in a box by now. Leave me alone, Sienna, Jack said, her voice steady, despite the fear gripping her throat. Mrs. Vane, please step back, David Miller said, trying to sound authoritative. Julian laughed. And who is this, your public defender? Jack, really? This is embarrassing. Just sign the papers and leave. You're going to lose. I'm not signing anything, Jack said, stepping forward. You're lying about me, Julian, and I'm going to prove it. Sienna laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Prove it. Who's going to believe you? You're a nobody. You're nothing without Julian. Sienna stepped closer, invading Jack's personal space. She lowered her voice so the nearby bailiffs couldn't hear. You know, it would be so much easier if you just disappeared. Maybe you'll have an accident. Stress is so bad for the baby, isn't it? Get away from me, Jack said instinctively, putting a hand on her stomach. Sienna's eyes flashed with malice. Make me. It happened in a split second. Jack tried to step around Sienna to get to the courtroom doors. Sienna, seemingly adjusting her purse sharply, jutted her hip and extended her leg. It wasn't a stumble. It was a calculated trip. Jack's foot caught Sienna's ankle. She pitched forward. With her center of gravity shifted by the pregnancy, she couldn't catch herself. Jack! David shouted. Jack hit the hard marble floor with a sickening thud. She landed on her side, narrowly, avoiding her stomach, but the impact jarred her entire body. A sharp pain shot up her hip. The hallway went silent. "Oh my God!" Sienna shrieked, instantly playing the victim. "She attacked me! Did you see that she tried to tackle me and fell?" Julian looked down at his wife, who was gasping for air on the cold floor. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't check if she was okay. He just looked at his watch. "Get up, Jack," Julian hissed. "Stop making a scene. You're pathetic." David Miller was on his knees, helping Jack sit up. "Are you okay? Do we need a medic?" I think so." Jack stammered, tears stinging her eyes. She looked up at Julian, the man she had married. He was looking at her like she was gum on his shoe. "Let's go," Julian said to Sienna. "Court is starting. If she wants to lay on the floor, let her." Sienna stepped over Jack's legs, dusting off her pristine white suit. "Clumsy cow," she muttered as she passed. They walked into the courtroom, heads held high, confident that the world belonged to them. Jack gripped David's arm, pulling herself up. Her hip throbbed, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the rage that was now boiling over. "Are you sure you can go in there?" David asked. "I'm sure," Jack said, wiping her face. Her eyes were dry now. "Let's go." They pushed open the heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B. Inside, the bailiff was already calling the session to order. But there was a buzz of confusion near the bench. The court clerk was whispering frantically to Marcus Stone, Julian's lawyer. "What's going on?" David whispered. "I don't know," Jack said. Then the side door opened. Usually Judge Pendergast, a short, balding man with a penchant for mumbling, would walk out. But the man who walked out was tall. He had broad shoulders and a mane of silver hair that was perfectly coiffed. He moved with a terrifying grace, his black robes billowing around him. He radiated an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. Julian frowned, leaning toward his lawyer. "Who is that?" "That's not Pendergast." "I don't know," Marcus Stone whispered, looking unsettled. "Maybe a last-minute sub." Jack froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hands started to tremble, not from fear of Julian, but from a different kind of shock. The bailiff shouted, "All rise, the Honourable Justice, Harrison Blackwell, presiding." Julian and Sienna stood up, looking bored, but Jack couldn't move. She stared at the man on the bench. He arranged his papers, put on his reading glasses, and then, for the first time, looked out into the courtroom. His eyes scanned the room. They passed over Julian, They passed over Sienna. And then they landed on Jack. For a second, just a fraction of a second, the judge's stone-cold expression flickered. He saw the smudge of dirt on her dress from the fall. He saw the distress in her face. He saw the pregnancy. He looked back at Julian Thorne, and his eyes narrowed. "Be seated," Judge Blackwell boomed. His voice was deep resonant and filled with a dangerous calm. Julian leaned over to Sienna, whispering with a smirk. "Doesn't matter who the judge is. We have the money. We win." He had no idea that the man sitting 10 feet away from him had taught Jack how to ride a bike. He had no idea that he was staring into the eyes of a father who had just realized his daughter was in trouble. The atmosphere in courtroom 4B shifted the moment Justice Harrison Blackwell took his seat. The usual low hum of whispered conversations died out instantly, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Judge Blackwell was a legend in the New York legal system, a man known for his brilliant legal mind and his absolute lack of patience for fools or liars. He was nicknamed the Black Wall because once he made a ruling there was no getting through it. Jack sat at the defendant's table, her hands trembling in her lap. She dared not look up at him. She hadn't spoken to her father in 5 years, not since the screaming match in his study when she told him she was quitting law school to paint. He had told her she was throwing her life away, that she was naive, that she would end up depending on the whims of others. He was right, she thought bitterly, about everything. Docket number 49201. The clerk announced, her voice shaking slightly. Thorne versus Thorne. Emergency custody hearing and motion for defamation. Ready for the plaintiff, Your Honor. Marcus Stone boomed, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He exuded the confidence of a man who charged $1,200 an hour. We are seeking an immediate order of protection against the defendant, Mrs. Jack Thorne, and full legal and physical custody of the unborn child upon birth on the grounds of maternal unfitness and instability. Ready for the defendant, David Miller squeaked. He cleared his throat and tried again, deeper this time. Ready for the defendant, Your Honor, and we vehemently deny all allegations. Judge Blackwell did not look at the lawyers. He was reading the file in front of him. His face was a mask of granite. He flipped a page, the sound echoing in the silent room. Then another. Finally he looked up over his reading glasses. His eyes bored into Marcus Stone. "Mr. Stone," Blackwell said. His voice was calm, but it carried to the back of the room without a microphone. "I see here a motion to transfer this case from the family court docket to the Supreme Court emergency list. Can you explain why this matter requires such urgency?" "Absolutely, Your Honor," Stone said, stepping out from behind the table. He paced the floor, performing for an audience. "My client, Mr. Julian Thorne, is a prominent figure in the business community. His wife, the defendant, has engaged in a campaign of harassment. Furthermore, she is currently homeless, unemployed, and we have reason to believe suffering from untreated mental health issues that pose a direct threat to the child she is carrying. We need to secure the safety of that child immediately." Jack gasped softly. David put a hand on her arm to steady her. Judge Blackwell turned his gaze to the defense table. For a fleeting second, his eyes met Jack's. There was no warmth there, only an intense, analytical scrutiny. "Is this true, Counselor?" Blackwell asked David. "Is your client homeless?" David stood up, looking nervous. "Your Honor, my client was forcibly ejected from the marital home 3 weeks ago by the plaintiff. She is currently residing in a temporary rental in Queens. She is not homeless. She is displaced." "Displaced?" Blackwell repeated. He looked at Julian Thorne. Julian was sitting back in his chair, looking bored. He tapped his fingers on the table, checking his watch. He clearly felt this was beneath him. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said. Julian didn't stand up immediately. Stone nudged him. Julian rose slowly, offering a charming, practiced smile. "Yes, Your Honor. You are the CEO of Thorne Logistics, correct?" "I am." "Reported net worth in the range of $300 million. Give or take," Julian said with a shrug. "And yet," Blackwell said, his voice dropping an octave, "your pregnant wife is living in a temporary rental in Queens while you reside in the marital penthouse. Did you provide her with funds for suitable accommodation upon her departure?" Stone jumped in. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance." The defendant left voluntarily. "Overruled." Blackwell snapped, slamming his hand down. He didn't even look at Stone. He kept his eyes locked on Julian. "Answer the question, Mr. Thorne." Julian's smile faltered. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this. "Jack, Mrs. Thorne has a history of erratic behavior. She walked out. I offered her a settlement, which she refused." "A settlement," Blackwell said, looking down at his notes. "I see a draft here attached to the affidavit. You offered her $50,000 in exchange for sole custody and a non-disclosure agreement. Is that the settlement you refer to?" "It was a generous offer, considering she brings nothing to the marriage," Julian said coldly. "She is an artist, Your Honor. She hasn't earned a real paycheck in years. She is a parasite on my resources." The word hung in the air. Parasite. Jack flinched. She saw a muscle in Judge Blackwell's jaw twitch. It was a small tell one only she would notice. It was the same twitch he had when he was restraining his temper during her teenage years. "I see," Blackwell said smoothly. "So because she earns less money than you, she is a parasite, and therefore unfit to be a mother." "It's not just the money," Julian said, gaining confidence. "It's her lifestyle. She associates with low-class individuals. She is emotionally unstable. She creates scenes. Just moments ago, outside this very courtroom, she physically assaulted my partner, Miss Vane, in a fit of jealous rage." Judge Blackwell went very still. "She assaulted Miss Vane." "Yes, Your Honor," Julian said, pointing to Sienna, who was sitting in the gallery, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "She tackled her, in the hallway. My wife is violent, Your Honor. I fear for the safety of my child." Blackwell slowly turned his head to look at Jack. "Mrs. Thorne, did you assault Miss Vane?" Jack stood up. Her legs felt like jelly. "No, Your Honor, I didn't. She tripped me." "Liar!" Sienna cried out from the gallery. "Silence in the gallery!" the bailiff shouted. "She tripped me." Jack continued, her voice gaining strength. "I fell. I think I might be bruised. But I never touched her." Judge Blackwell looked between the two women, the polished, sneering mistress in the gallery and the tired, pregnant woman in the cheap dress standing before him, his daughter. "Mr. Stone," Blackwell said, his voice terrifyingly neutral, "you are aware that perjury is a felony, as is filing a false police report. My client stands by his statement, Your Honor." Stone said, though, he looked slightly less confident than before. "We have a witness, Miss Vane herself." "Then let's hear from her," Blackwell said. "Call Sienna Vane to the stand." Sienna stood up, smoothing her white suit. She walked to the witness stand with the grace of a runway model. She was enjoying this. She swore on the Bible, took her seat, and looked at the judge with a coquettish smile that usually worked on men of power. "Miss Vane," Stone began, "please describe the incident that occurred at approximately 8:55 a.m. this morning." Sienna took a dramatic breath. We were walking to the courtroom. Jack was waiting for us. She looked manic. She started screaming obscenities at Julian. I tried to calm her down, and she just lunged at me. She shoved me against the wall. I was terrified, not just for me, but for her baby. She's out of control. "Thank you, Miss Vane," Stone said, looking satisfied. "Your witness." David Miller stood up to cross-examine, but Judge Blackwell raised a hand. "Hold on, Mr. Miller," Blackwell said. "I have a few questions for the witness myself." Sienna smiled at the judge. "Of course, Your Honor." Blackwell turned his chair to face her fully. "Ms. Vane, you stated that the defendant lunged at you and shoved you against the wall. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "It was violent. And you are uninjured." I have a high pain tolerance, but my shoulder is throbbing." "And Mr. Thorne witnessed this?" "Yes, he saw the whole thing. He had to pull her off me." Blackwell nodded slowly. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "It is interesting, Ms. Vane. This courthouse was renovated 3 years ago. As part of that renovation, high-definition security cameras were installed in every corridor specifically to monitor potential altercations between litigants." The color drained from Sienna's face instantly. Her smile vanished. Julian, sitting at the plaintiff's table, stiffened. "I wasn't aware," Sienna stammered. "Most people aren't," Blackwell said. He pressed a button on his desk. "Bailiff, please contact security. I want the footage from the Corridor 4B camera timestamp, 8:50 a.m. to 9:00 a.m., brought up on the main monitors. Immediately." "Objection!" Stone shouted, jumping up. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We haven't had time to review. This is an emergency custody hearing regarding the safety of a child." Blackwell roared, his voice cracking like a whip. "If the mother is violent, I need to know. If the father and his mistress are perjuring themselves to frame a pregnant woman, I need to know that too. Sit down, Mr. Stone, or I will hold you in contempt." Stone sat down, pale. Jack watched her father. She had never seen him like this in a courtroom. She had only seen this intense, focused anger when he was defending something he cared about. The large monitors mounted on the walls flickered to life. Static then, a clear, wide-angle view of the hallway outside. The room went deathly silent. The video feed was crisp. It showed the sterile marble hallway. At 8:54 a.m., Jack and David Miller were seen standing near the wall talking quietly. Jack looked small, anxious, clutching her stomach. At 8:55 a.m., the elevator doors opened. Julian and Sienna walked out. Even without sound, their body language was aggressive. They walked straight toward Jack. On the screen, the confrontation played out. The court watched as Sienna invaded Jack's personal space. They saw Jack try to step away, retreating. And then the moment of truth. Jack tried to walk past them. Sienna clearly and deliberately extended her right leg, hooking it around Jack's ankle. It wasn't a defensive move. It was a trip. Jack pitched forward heavily. The courtroom collectively gasped as they watched the pregnant woman hit the floor hard. But the video didn't end there. As Jack lay on the ground, clearly in pain, Sienna didn't check on her. She checked her nails. She looked down at Jack and laughed. The high-definition camera caught the movement of her lips. It was mocking. Julian stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at his watch. He didn't bend down. He didn't offer a hand. He stepped over his wife's legs to walk toward the courtroom door. The feed froze. Judge Blackwell stared at the frozen image of Julian stepping over the mother of his child. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Blackwell slowly turned his head from the screen to the witness stand. Sienna was trembling. She looked toward Julian for help, but Julian was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact. He knew. He knew they were caught. "Miss Vane," Judge Blackwell said. His voice was no longer loud. It was soft, dangerous, and dripping with disdain. "You just testified under oath that Mrs. Thorne lunged at you and shoved you against a wall. Would you like to amend your statement?" I, Sienna stuttered. "It happened so fast. Maybe I remembered it wrong." "You remembered it wrong?" Blackwell asked. "You remembered a pregnant woman falling on her face as her attacking you." "I felt threatened," Sienna cried out, trying to salvage the situation. "She was looking at me with such hate." "Bailiff," Blackwell said sharply. "Take Miss Vane into custody. Charge her with perjury and assault in the 3rd degree." "What?" Sienna shrieked, standing up. "You can't do that, Julian." 2 bailiffs moved in, grabbing Sienna by the arms. "Julian, do something!" she screamed as they handcuffed her. "I'm not going to jail. This is ridiculous." Julian remained seated, his face pale. He didn't look at her. He was calculating the damage to his reputation. He was cutting his losses. As Sienna was dragged out the side door, still screaming, the heavy oak doors slammed shut, leaving a ringing silence in her wake. Judge Blackwell turned his eyes to Julian. "Mr. Thorne," Blackwell said. Julian stood up slowly. "Your Honor, I clearly didn't see the incident correctly. Sienna told me she was attacked. I was merely repeating what I was told." "You were standing 2 feet away," Blackwell said. "I watched you step over your wife while she was lying on the floor. You didn't help her. You didn't call for medical aid. You checked your watch." I was under a strict timeline to be here." Julian stammered, his arrogance evaporating like mist. "I assumed she was being dramatic. She often is." "Dramatic?" Blackwell repeated. "You filed a motion claiming she is unfit to parent. Yet the only evidence of unfitness I have seen in this courtroom today comes from the plaintiff's table." "Your Honor," Marcus Stone interjected, trying to save his client. "While the incident in the hallway is unfortunate, it does not negate the fact that Mrs. Thorne is homeless and without income. The child's welfare depends on financial stability. Financial stability is not the only metric of a parent, Mr. Stone." Blackwell said. "Character counts, integrity counts, compassion counts." Blackwell looked at Jack. For the first time, his expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, "are you in pain? Do you need a medic?" Jack stood up, holding the table for support. "I'm sore, Your Honor, but I think the baby is okay. I want this to be over." "It is not over," Blackwell said grimly. "We are just getting started." He turned back to Julian. "Mr. Thorne, you have accused this woman of being a nobody. You have tried to use your wealth to bully her into submission. You thought that because she had no money, she had no voice." Julian straightened his tie, trying to regain some composure. "With all due respect, Judge, this is a custody hearing, not a morality play. The law states that the child's best interests are served by the parent who can provide the best environment. I have a $10 million penthouse. She has a studio in Queens. The law is on my side." "The law," Blackwell said, "is a funny thing, Mr. Thorne. It relies heavily on credibility, and you have just destroyed yours. However, you are correct about one thing. The court must consider the support system of the mother." Blackwell paused. He took off his glasses and set them on the bench. He looked weary but resolute. "Mr. Thorne, you claimed earlier that Mrs. Thorne has no family, no connections, that she crawled out of a trailer park." "That was a figure of speech," Julian muttered. "It was a lie," Blackwell said. "And a foolish one. A man in your position should really do better due diligence on the people he marries." Julian frowned. "What are you talking about? You didn't know." Blackwell asked, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, a cold, terrifying smile. You didn't know who her father was. Her father is a deadbeat, Julian scoffed. She never speaks of him. He's probably some drunk in Ohio. Jack closed her eyes. She knew what was coming. Actually, Blackwell said, leaning forward, he is a drunk in Ohio, or at least he was before he got sober 30 years ago, before he went to law school, before he became a Supreme Court justice in the state of New York. Julian froze. Marcus Stone dropped his pen. I don't understand, Julian whispered. Blackwell stood up. He loomed over the courtroom, his black robes making him look like an avenging angel. My name is Harrison Blackwell, he said clearly, and Jack Thorne is Jack Blackwell. She is my daughter. A collective gasp ripped through the courtroom louder than the one for the video. The court reporter stopped typing, her mouth agape. Julian looked from the judge to Jack and back to the judge. His face went from pale to a sickly shade of grey. He looked at Jack with wide, horrified eyes. You, Julian choked out. You're her father. I am, Blackwell said. And for the last hour, I have sat here and watched you insult her, lie about her, and allow your mistress to assault her. I have watched you treat my daughter and the grandchild you didn't know I knew about like garbage. This is a conflict of interest. Marcus Stone shrieked, his voice cracking. Mistrial. I demand a mistrial. You cannot preside over this case. You are absolutely right, Mr. Stone, Blackwell said calmly. I cannot preside over this case. It would be highly unethical. He picked up his gavel. I am recusing myself from this matter, effective immediately. However, he pointed the gavel at Julian. Before I step down, I am issuing a temporary emergency order. Based on the video evidence of assault and your complicity in it, I am granting full temporary custody of the unborn child to Jack Thorne. I am also issuing a temporary restraining order against both Julian Thorne and Sienna Vane. You are to stay 500 feet away from her at all times. You can't do that, Julian shouted. You're biased. I am a father protecting a victim of domestic violence, Blackwell said. Any judge in this building would do the same after seeing that tape. I just happened to be the one in the chair. He banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. Court is adjourned. The case will be reassigned to Judge Rodriguez for final sentencing and asset division. Good luck, Mr. Thorne. You're going to need it. Blackwell stood up and walked toward the door of his chambers. He didn't look back, but as the bailiff called, "All rise," Jack watched her father disappear behind the door. He hadn't hugged her. He hadn't smiled at her. But he had saved her. Julian collapsed into his chair, head in his hands. Marcus Stone was frantically packing his briefcase, already mentally drafting his resignation letter. David Miller leaned over to Jack, his eyes wide. You never told me your dad was the Black Wall. Jack let out a shaky breath, her hand resting on her stomach. I didn't think he'd care. Well, David said, looking at the devastation on the other side of the aisle. I think he cares. But the war wasn't over. Julian Thorne was a man with unlimited resources and a bruised ego. And now he was cornered. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. And Jack knew her father. The recusal was just the beginning. The real drama would happen outside the courtroom. The news cycle moved faster than the law. By the time Jack stepped out of the courthouse, the story had already leaked. A tabloid reporter tipping a clerk $50 had gotten the headline, Logistics mogul humiliated secret daughter of Justice Blackwell, revealed in shocking courtroom brawl. Flashbulbs popped in Jack's face as she descended the stairs. David Miller tried to shield her, but the questions came like darts. Jack, is it true your father is the judge? Did Sienna Vane really attack you? Julian, Mr. Thorne. Is it true you tried to bribe the court? Julian Thorne exited 10 minutes later, flanked by security. He looked like a man walking to the gallows, his face set in a grimace of suppressed rage. He ignored the press diving into his waiting black SUV. Inside the car, the silence was deafening. Marcus Stone sat opposite him, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You're fired," Julian said, staring out the tinted window. "Julian, listen," Marcus pleaded. "Nobody knew about Blackwell. It was an ambush. We can appeal. We can claim bias." "I said you're fired," Julian snapped, turning his gaze on the lawyer. "Get out. We're in moving traffic, Julian." "Driver, pull over," Julian commanded. The SUV screeched to a halt on Broadway. Julian waited. Marcus Stone, humiliated, gathered his briefcase and stepped out into the rain. Julian slammed the door. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number that wasn't in his contacts list. It was a number memorized for emergencies, the kind of emergencies that lawyers couldn't fix. "It's me," Julian said, when the line connected. "I have a problem, a big one. I need you to dig up everything you can on Harrison Blackwell. Every skeleton, every unpaid parking ticket, every mistress. I want him destroyed." "It'll cost you," a gravelly voice replied. "I don't care," Julian hissed. "Burn him down." Meanwhile, in the quiet, mahogany-lined chambers of the Supreme Court, Jack sat on a leather chair. She was shivering, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. Her father stood by the window looking out at the city. He had taken off his robes, revealing a crisp white shirt and suspenders. He looked older than she remembered. "Here," he said, turning around and handing her a glass of water. "Drink." "Thank you," Jack whispered. She took a sip. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 5 years of unspoken words. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally. His voice wasn't angry anymore, it was just tired. "Why didn't you tell me you were married to him, that you were pregnant?" "I wanted to do it on my own," Jack said, her voice cracking. "I wanted to prove to you that I could make it as an artist, that I didn't need your help." "And how did that work out?" Blackwell asked sharply. Jack flinched. "You were right." "Okay, you were right. I failed. I married a monster because he made me feel special, and then he threw me away. I have nothing, Dad." "Are you happy?" Harrison Blackwell sighed. He walked over and sat on the edge of his desk, looking down at her. "Jack, I never wanted to be right. I wanted you to be safe. There is a difference." He reached out, hesitating for a moment, before placing a hand on her shoulder. "I saw the video," he said softly. "I saw him step over you. If I hadn't been on that bench." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "He won't get near you again. I promise you that. He's powerful, Dad. He has millions. He'll appeal the custody order. He'll say you were biased." "Let him try," Blackwell said, a dark glint returning to his eyes. "I recused myself. The case goes to Rodriguez, and Rodriguez hates bullies even more than I do. But Julian isn't going to stop at the courts. Men like him. When they lose control, they get dangerous." He stood up and walked to his coat rack. "You're not going back to Queens." "I have to. My stuff is there. We'll send a mover. You're coming home, to the estate in Westchester. It has a gate, it has security, and it has me." Jack looked at him. She saw the stubborn, difficult man she had run away from. But she also saw the father who had just nuked his own career to save her. "Okay," she said. 3 days later, the war escalated from legal motions to scorched earth tactics. It began at a pharmacy counter near the Blackwell estate. Jack tried to buy prenatal vitamins, but the card was declined. "Frozen," the teller said, pity in her eyes. "Pending fraud investigation." Julian hadn't just locked the joint accounts. He had used his banking connections to flag Jack's personal savings. He was trying to starve her out. Then came the media assault. The Post ran a fabricated story. Judge's daughter in secret rehab. But the coup de grace landed Tuesday night. Jack was sketching in her father's library when Harrison walked in, his face an ashen grey. He held a tablet like it was a weapon. He released the photos. Harrison said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. Private ones. From the honeymoon. Jack felt the blood drain from her face. She saw the blurred thumbnails, moments of intimacy weaponized to paint her as loose and unstable. She threw the tablet onto the sofa, sobbing. I can't do this. He has no shame. He's going to break me. He has no shame, Harrison agreed, sitting beside her. But he also has no loyalty. I made a call to the district attorney. Sienna Vane is currently rotting in a cell at Rikers Island. Julian hasn't posted her bail. Jack wiped her eyes. He left her. She's a liability. He's cutting loose ends. We're going to pay her a visit. The visitation room at Rikers smelled of industrial bleach and despair. Sienna Vane sat behind the scratched plexiglass, stripped of her Versace and her dignity. Her hair was greasy, her face gaunt. She sneered when she saw them, but fear lurked behind her eyes. Come to gloat, she spat into the receiver. No, Jack said, her voice steady. I came to tell you the truth. Julian transferred $5 million to a Cayman Islands account yesterday. In his name only. He's planning to run Sienna. And he's not taking you. Sienna's lip quivered. He loves me. He's fixing this. He's fixing his escape, Harrison interjected, leaning forward. You're facing 5 years for perjury. He's looking at early retirement on a non-extradition island, unless you give us the leverage to stop him. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. Sienna looked at the guard, then back at Jack. The realization of her betrayal finally shattered her resolve. If I talk, I want immunity, she whispered. Talk first, Harrison commanded. It's not just cargo. Sienna confessed, tears spilling over. It's human trafficking, illegal labor for Midwest factories. He calls it special logistics. There's a shipment coming into Port Newark Terminal C tomorrow night. Julian is overseeing it personally. That's your chance. 6 months had passed since the raid at Port Newark. The winter snow had melted, replaced by the vibrant green of early summer. New York City moved on as it always did, but for the people involved in the Thorne versus Blackwell saga, nothing would ever be the same. The sentencing hearing for Julian Thorne was held at the Federal District Court in Lower Manhattan. It was the social event of the season, though not the kind Julian had ever hoped to attend. The courtroom was packed. Jack sat in the front row. She was no longer the scared woman in the thrift store dress. She wore a tailored black blazer, her head held high. Beside her sat her father, Harrison Blackwell. He had retired from the bench 2 months prior, citing a desire to focus on family matters. Julian was led in. He was unrecognizable. The hand-tailored suits were gone, replaced by an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. His hair, once his pride, was shorn close to his scalp. He looked gaunt, his eyes darting nervously around the room until they landed on Jack. He didn't sneer. He didn't smirk. He looked empty. Judge Rodriguez, the man who had taken over the custody case, was now presiding over the asset forfeiture, while a federal judge handled the criminal sentencing. Mr. Thorne, the federal judge said, his voice booming, you have pleaded guilty to charges of human trafficking, racketeering, and money laundering to avoid the death penalty, but do not mistake this plea for leniency. The judge adjusted his glasses. You used your family's legacy to build an empire of misery. You sold human beings like cattle to fund a lifestyle of excess. You attempted to destroy your wife and unborn child to protect your secrets. I sentence you to 30 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole." A gasp went through the room. 30 years. Julian would be an old man before he saw the sky as a free person again. Julian slumped against the table. He looked back at Jack, mouthing one word. Why Jack stood up. She wasn't required to speak, but the judge allowed it. She walked to the railing. "You asked why, Julian," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You thought power was about money. You thought strength was about stepping on people. But you forgot the most basic rule of all." She looked at her father, who gave her a proud nod. "You don't kick a woman when she's down," Jack said, "because she might just stand back up." As Julian was led away in handcuffs, weeping, Jack felt a weight lift off her chest. It was finally over. 2 weeks later, the delivery room at Mount Sinai Hospital was chaotic. "Push, Jack. You're almost there." Harrison Blackwell, the terrifying Black Wall of the Supreme Court, was currently holding a cup of ice chips and looking terrified. "I can't," Jack screamed, gripping the rails. "Yes, you can," Harrison said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You took down a billionaire crime lord. You can do this." With one final primal scream, the cry of a baby filled the room. The doctor lifted the infant up. "It's a boy." Jack collapsed back onto the pillows, tears streaming down her face. They cleaned the baby and placed him on her chest. He was small, pink, and perfect. He had dark eyes just like hers. Harrison Blackwell leaned over, staring at the baby with a look of pure, unadulterated awe. The hard lines of his face softened. The stern judge was gone. The grandfather had arrived. "What's his name?" Harrison whispered. Jack looked at her father. "I was thinking." "Harrison," the old man choked up. He turned away, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. That's a good name. Strong name." "Harrison Julian Blackwell," Jack said. "He takes my name. The Thorne legacy dies with Julian. The Blackwell legacy starts new." 1 year later. The gallery in Chelsea was overflowing. The exhibition was titled Resilience. Jack stood in the center of the room, surrounded by her work. The paintings were raw, emotional, and powerful. They depicted storm clouds breaking marble courtrooms, shattering, and a woman rising from the floor. The centerpiece was a massive oil painting, titled The Fall. It showed a woman in a blue dress falling in a grey hallway, but her shadow on the wall was that of a lioness. "It's magnificent," a critic said, sipping champagne. "The raw emotion. It's palpable. I heard the artist has quite the backstory." "She does," a voice said. Jack turned to see Sienna Vane standing there. Sienna looked different. She was working as a waitress at a diner in Jersey, now part of her probation agreement. She wore simple clothes, her face free of heavy makeup. She looked humble. "I didn't think you'd come," Jack said. "I wanted to say sorry," Sienna said quietly. "For real this time, not because a judge made me." Jack looked at the woman who had once made her life a living hell. She didn't feel anger. She felt indifference. "I forgive you, Sienna," Jack said. "Not for you. For me. I don't have room for hate anymore." Sienna nodded, tears in her eyes, and slipped away into the crowd. Jack felt a tug on her dress. She looked down. Little Harrison, now a toddler with wobbly legs, was looking up at her, holding a toy gavel his grandfather had carved for him. "Up," he demanded. Jack scooped him up, kissing his cheek. "Is he bothering the artist?" Harrison Sr. asked, walking up with a smile. He looked 10 years younger since retirement. Never, Jack said. She looked around the room. She had her art. She had her son. She had her father. She remembered the night she stood in the rain outside the penthouse, believing her life was over. She realized now that it hadn't been the end. It was just the opening argument. And she had won the case. So what do you think was Julian's punishment? Fitting for the crimes he committed, or did he deserve worse? And what about Sienna? Do you think people can truly change after betraying someone so deeply? This story reminds us that power and money can hide a lot of sins, but they can't hide the truth forever. Sometimes the person you think is a nobody has the strongest connections of all. It also shows that family isn't just about who you live with, but who stands up for you when the world pushes you down. If you enjoyed this story of justice, betrayal, and redemption, please hit that like button, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.